While today NFL franchises are some of the most valuable sports franchises in the world, there was a time where owning an NFL team was a labor of love. Huge amounts of NFL teams have actually existed and gone bankrupt over the course of the league's history. I'm Jake with FootballLore, and today we'll be exploring some of the bankrupt NFL franchises from history. If you guys want to see more of these, then be sure to press the like button. If this video gets 100 likes, we will make another video with the rest of the bankrupt teams for you guys to enjoy. The first team I want to talk about today is the Dallas Texans. In 1952, the Dallas Texans existed for one single year in the NFL. They came about when the Dayton Triangles franchise was put on the market in 1944. They ended up having a short stint in Boston and New York before eventually selling the team back to the league. In 1952, a group of young Dallas millionaires decided to purchase the team to make it the first professional sports franchise in the state of Texas. They relocated what was left of operations from New York to Dallas and paid $200,000 for the rights to the team. The league approved the sale and relocation of the team to Dallas, and the team was set to play their games in the massive 75,000-seat Cotton Bowl. In their first game of their existence, the Texans would get destroyed by the Giants with a final score of 24-6. They hadn't even managed to fill the stadium to 25% capacity, and the team had known they needed to sell a minimum of 25,000 tickets for the team to break even. By November of that year, it was clear that this entire venture would be an incredible lesson in losing a lot of money very quickly. They lost 27-6 to the Los Angeles Rams in front of a crowd of just 10,000 fans. The owners had sustained losses of $250,000, which when adjusted for inflation is a loss of more than $3 million today. The investors were not able to meet payroll, and they weren't getting any sponsorships from local businesses or ticket sales to help keep the ship afloat. At the time, teams couldn't rely on the huge interstate broadcasting rights that exist today, and support from the local community was really do or die when it came to team operations. Without the support from the community, the Texans were going to keep bleeding money endlessly. The owners decided to sell the team back to the league in November with 5 games left on their schedule and moved the team to Hershey, Pennsylvania for the rest of the season. The team was so unpopular that the high school championship game actually ended up drawing more crowds than the NFL team could. Their last game was a 41-6 blowout at the hands of the Detroit Lions, and only one player from the roster could go on to make the Pro Bowl at the end of the year. The NFL had been trying to find a buyer for the team, but no one was willing to take the risk. At the end of the year, the team was sold to Carroll Rosenblum, and the remainder of its assets were moved to Baltimore to become the Baltimore Colts. The Colts didn't really want the embarrassing one-year history of the Texans, and didn't want to keep the branding since they wouldn't be located in the state at all. This means that the Texans are the most recent franchise that has ever gone bankrupt in the history of the NFL, and its history is not included in the lineage of any other franchise currently operating. While obviously this name would later be used by the AFL and the Houston Texans today, the team only ended up officially operating for 1 year. The Dallas Texans are probably the costliest failure of an NFL franchise in history. Most other franchises that went bankrupt really happened in the sport's infancy. Losing $3 million over the course of a few months made this one of the worst investments the young businessmen had ever made in their lives. Next up, I want to talk about the Boston Yanks, which fittingly enough is a part of the team that became the Dallas Texans. The Boston Yanks played from 1944 to 1948 at Fenway Park. The owner had picked the name the Yanks because he had originally wanted a team that could play at Yankee Field in New York. However, he didn't have enough money to secure rights to the stadium, so he moved them to Boston instead. Because of the shortage of young men available during World War II, the team managed to finish with just a 3-6-1 record in 1945. When the owner of the Brooklyn Tigers announced his intentions to move his team to the newly established rival football league, the NFL panicked. They revoked all of the rights to players who had played on the team and gave their rights to the owner of the Yanks. Their owner kept the team in Boston for 3 more seasons before he was approved to move his team to New York as he had originally dreamed. He changed the name of his team to the New York Bulldogs, and they were an absolute dumpster fire on the field. In 1949, they managed a 1-10-1 record as well as selling just 48,000 tickets throughout their entire season. In 1950, he decided to change the team team back to the New York Yanks, and at one point they were 6-1 leading the National Conference. Their crowd attendance started to reach almost 50,000 per game, but they finished the season at just 7-5, and their fan support dropped from its peak during this time. The next year they destroyed all their momentum by starting out 0-6, and they were selling just 7,000 tickets per game once again. At this point, the owner was facing the reality that it was going to be difficult to continue to run the team with this financial outlook. At this point, the NFL realized that the market was dominated by the Giants, and they didn't really see the benefit of having a second team that barely sold any tickets in their league. So after the 1951 season, the franchise was canceled by the NFL. The remainder of the team's assets and roster were sold to the investors that would eventually create the Dallas Texans. But this new ownership group was considered a new franchise when they changed the name. It wouldn't be until the founding of the Jets, where the New York market would be successfully shared by two NFL teams. I do think it's surprising they weren't able to succeed in New York during a time where the Giants were doing well. I believe if they wouldn't have been so awful on the field, there is a good chance they could have had some success, especially with their Yank branding. The truth is, no fans want to support a team that is consistently awful. After so many bad seasons to start their tenure in New York, they had a large uphill battle to win fan support. Look at how the NFL expansion teams that started horribly are still way behind when it comes to attendance and fan support even now with the size of the league. Alright, now I want to talk about the Brooklyn Dodgers of the NFL. They were an NFL team from 1930 to 1943 and changed their name to the Brooklyn Tigers for their last year in 1944. They played in the same stadium as the Brooklyn Dodgers baseball team at the time and were purchased for just $2,500 and a handshake from an investor from Dayton. In their first year, they finished 4th in the NFL but fell to 2-12 the following season. From there, they fell into disarray for most of their tenure in Brooklyn. They did manage to sell an average of 25,000 tickets per game, which made them profitable, but their on-the-field performance left much to be desired. They also made history in 1939 by being a part of the first NFL game that was televised when they played the Eagles in a 23-14 victory. From 1942 to their ending, they went on a steep decline as World War II had taken most of the players off to war instead of playing football. The player shortage got so bad that they merged with the Boston Yanks for the 1945 season. After that, the Tigers owner Dan Topping decided to move his team to the newly formed AAFC League instead of the NFL. The NFL immediately took away all their rights to their players and gave them to the Boston franchise, alongside letting them relocate to New York. They were great in the AAFC and reached the finals in 1946 and 1947, but the league would go bankrupt in 1949, and only 3 of the teams from the league were merged into the NFL. Unfortunately, the Brooklyn Dodgers were not one of the lucky 3 teams that made the cut, mostly because the NFL knew their ownership group was more than willing to jump ship when it was convenient. At the time, I'm sure they thought that moving to the AAFC would secure their future and help make the team more profitable, but really it sealed their fate. It would be like an NFL team leaving to join the UFL and then being shocked when the UFL goes out of business just 3 years from now. I know at the time the NFL was nowhere near the behemoth it is now, but even then it was clear that the winner of this football arms race was going to be the NFL. It wouldn't be until the creation of the AFL where the NFL would have to take another league seriously. The Cincinnati Reds continued the tradition of naming your football team after your city's baseball team. They played in the 1933 and 1934 seasons and played mostly at Crosley Field, which was the home of the real Reds at the time. The Reds really do not have much to brag about through their short-lived history in the league. Most teams know the objective of the game is to score as many points as possible, but the Reds played football more like golf instead. They hold the record of the lowest recorded season scoring totals in NFL history. In 1933, they scored just 38 points in 10 games. In 1934, they had just 37 points in 11 games. The team didn't have much in terms of local support, and as we know, selling tickets was the primary way for teams to make money during this time period. The lack of support made it impossible for the owners to pay the players, coaches, stadium dues, or league dues. This would be made a problem halfway through the 1934 season when the NFL suspended the team's right to exist for its failure to make any payments toward league dues. While there were still 3 weeks left in the season, the NFL allowed an independent team, the St. Louis Gunners, to play in place of the Reds. The Gunners played just those 3 games in the NFL, but had existed as a team for the Missouri National Guard for some time. They played exhibition games mainly, but had a 5-2-1 record in 1931. Before the 1934 season, the city of St. Louis had bought the rights to the Cincinnati Reds if their dues were not paid. When they went down in Week 8, they played their last 3 games in the NFL. They managed to win 1 game against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but after the season ended, they decided to move to the original AFL that folded after a single season. I'm sure those players look back and wish they had stayed a part of the NFL. They had bought the rights to a franchise and had every right to demand to play. Switching to the AFL sealed their fate as something that only gets talked about on YouTube channels with 1,000 subscribers. I will say St. Louis has been abandoned by football teams leaving or going bankrupt enough times they might actually be entitled to free therapy from the NFL. It seems like they can't catch a break when it comes to teams staying put. Our next team is the Staten Island Stapletons. They were originally founded in 1915 as a neighborhood team that played semi-professionally. The team was organized by Dan Blaine, who had made money through his chain of restaurants in the 20s. The team actually won several local titles before World War I started. In 1924, their original owner secured a deal to play in Thompson Stadium, which was a minor league baseball park at the time. This site is now the home of the Stapleton Housing Project, but at the time, it was a lively park where thousands would come to watch the team play. When the Giants became the belle of the ball in New York, the Stapletons had a severe drop in popularity. In 1928, they officially joined the NFL and they hired Ken Strong, who would be a Hall of Famer for the team. The Stapletons had made it to the big leagues, but couldn't really compete on the field, and throughout all of their history, they did not manage to have a single winning season. By 1932, their performance had fallen so much that they actually finished last in the league. The NFL allowed the owner of the team to suspend their team for the season in order to rebuild their offense and secure more funding. At this point, it was hemorrhaging money, and there was not much that could be done to save the team. In 1934, they did manage to play some semi-professional games in an attempt to generate some revenue, but it was not enough with the small crowds they were drawing. In June of 1935, the franchise was declared forfeited, and it was relegated to the history of the NFL. Many experts agree that this team's downfall mainly came down to the Great Depression and having way too small of a stadium to ever make running the team profitable. If their owner hadn't been independently wealthy, there is no way they would have been able to operate as long as they did. The Cleveland Indians were an NFL team that operated for a single year in 1931. They were a league-sponsored team that actually played a vast majority of their games on the road. Cleveland was chosen because they had just finished the Cleveland Stadium, which had a seating capacity of 83,000. This was by far the largest stadium in the league, and if the team was successful, then the league would be printing money as a result. This was still early in the NFL's history, and it was important for them to stabilize revenue to continue to grow as an organization. They played just 2 games at home in their existence and couldn't draw any crowd, with home crowds of under 10,000 fans on both occasions. Their first game, they drew only 2,000 to the stadium. After this season, they attempted to find an owner who was willing to keep the team in Cleveland, but no businessman was willing to take on a franchise that was so obviously destined to fail. The team's spot was sold to George Preston Marshall, who actually ended up establishing what would eventually become the Redskins in Boston. This team only played for a single season, and I think it is funny to create a team just to have them play most of their games on the road. It's like they were the Washington Generals of professional football, just made to take a beating and keep the fans entertained. The Frankford Yellow Jackets played in Frankfort, Pennsylvania from 1924 to 1931. The Yellow Jackets actually won the NFL championship in 1926. But they can trace their roots all the way to 1899 when a team was established in the community. It started as a non-profit that was funded by donations from the community, and all of the team's excess income was donated to charities in the local community. The hospital, nursery, Boy Scouts, and American Legion were all recipients of donations from the team's operation in the city. This obviously made them very popular with the local community, and when the chance came to join the NFL in 1924, they jumped on the opportunity. They had the reputation as one of the best independent football teams in the country, and they had a winning record against NFL teams they had played in exhibition games. In 1930, they faced severe financial instability as a result of the Great Depression. The president of the organization was shocked as they had 10 straight losses during the year, and this dwindled the fan base even further. Very few people had disposable income to spend on football games, and if they did, they certainly weren't going to support a team that seemed incapable of winning. It didn't help that in 1932, 1931, their stadium had been severely damaged by a fire, and this made generating any money from fans even harder. They tried to play in more central Philadelphia to gain more fans, but instead isolated their die-hard fans who felt abandoned and gained few new fans due to their play. At the end of the year, they attempted to find a buyer to take over the team and continue operations, but no one during the Depression was able to come up with the funds to run a football team. At the end of the bidding, no one had even placed a bid, and the franchise was shelved despite having 73 wins in the NFL. Eventually, the leftover assets were purchased and turned into the Philadelphia Eagles. The owners had specifically made the purchase in a way where all of the Yellow Jackets' history remained separate from their new franchise. Technically, the Eagles are classified as a 1933 expansion team rather than a continuation of the Yellow Jackets when it comes to record keeping. It does suck that something that really started as a good idea was chewed up and spat out by the Great Depression. This team actually is an important piece of NFL history, considering they won a championship unlike some of the others on this list. That is just some of the NFL franchises that have gone bankrupt over the years. There actually are another 37 NFL franchises that have gone bankrupt, and like we said, if this video can get 100 likes, we will do another video where we go over all 37 teams in one piece of content. So press the like button if you want to see that video in YY our feed later. If you like football videos like this, we do post 2 football documentaries a week, and we would love your help as we try to hit 10,000 subscribers this year. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.